You're listening to the Healthy Creative Ministry podcast with Matt Curtis. This is the podcast that helps you take your creative ministry from wherever you are today to healthy and effective.
What does an effective strategy look like? This week, I want to share 5 traits of an effective strategy with you in response to this question. But before we get there, I want to take just a minute to really talk about why this matters for the health of your ministry. As you know, me, Matt Curtis, and Lunchtime Heroes, I'm all about the health of your creative ministry. I went through seasons of my career where I was really wrestling because I didn't have a lot of the infrastructure in place that would protect health. And over time, that led me to burnout. And I don't want that to happen for you. What I've realized is that when you don't have a clear plan, your life will be chaos. It is a guarantee in communications ministry, creative ministry. It's a guarantee that your life will be chaos without the right amount of clarity. People are asking us to promote things all the time, randomly, at the last minute. We have these conflicts because 3 different people are asking for the same announcement slot. They don't know it, but we do. And so now we become the hub of conflict for ministry leaders. We become the no people. That's what we're known as. You know, those who have a backbone and have read, how to say no, like whatever. Like, we are the ones who are now difficult to work with. Or my personal favorite, and I hope you haven't heard it, but you may have. We are the ones that are limiting ministry because of our oppressive regime, when really all we're trying to do is just survive. When you don't have effective strategies, it guarantees that you will live a life of crisis management. That's something that I did not realize earlier in my career. You're going to jump from one crisis to the next crisis until you burn out. Not only have I lived it myself, I mean, I've shared about my burnout story. It's actually many podcasts ago. There were 4 episodes talking about burnout. So not only have I lived it, but I've seen it. I see it happening in the lives of creatives that I'm connected to, different churches that I'm connected to. I've seen it happen where their creatives are burning out. And then I've seen it where another person comes in, and you know what happens? That person burns out. And it becomes this repeated cycle of burning out. I don't want that for you. I don't want you to encounter that. I don't want you to have to go through that because it's really hard. It's really painful. So this week's question of what does an effective strategy look like? I just want to put a little context around it. It's not just like, oh, we got neat strategies, good for us. Hey, my social plan is really working and people are liking and commenting. That I care less about that. That is a factor, but I care less about that and more about the fact that having these strategies are a key for your longevity in ministry. And I want you to have a long, productive season in ministry. For as long as God has called you into ministry, I want you to thrive there. So that's kind of the why behind this question. Now, a little bit of a smaller why. I had a conversation recently with a church. I partnered with them. They reached out asking for some help with developing some strategies. They're in the midst of transition right now. And what's happening is all of their energy is actually being spent keeping the ship afloat. And so that might be relatable. I wanted to share the context of this a little bit because I feel like this is a really relatable situation. Look, I'm skilled enough to do it. I just don't have time for this. That's a little bit of the context there for them. So they reached out and they said, hey, can you help us? Can you help us create a few different key communication strategies? These are the major tension points that we're feeling, that we're kind of sensing. One of them was actually a strategy for email. They're a large enough organization. They have multiple ministries, but then they also have multiple campuses. So there's a lot of complexity around the air traffic control side of things. What was actually happening was people in the congregation were calling frustrated by both the volume of emails that they were getting, but even more than that, the repetition. It felt like the departments didn't know that the other one was talking about the same thing. So imagine getting 4 emails on the same day, and they all had similar information. It's the worst. So they needed help navigating some of this stuff. Historically, for me, building strategy has always been a part of the interim comm support that I offer, really kind of like the formal big consulting that I do with churches. Somebody leaves the team, somebody's asked to leave the team, and so I step in as interim leadership, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm doing is evaluating the strategies. What systems do you have in place? What do we need to rebuild? That kind of stuff. After having this conversation, I thought, you know what? Let's try something different. I'm always a fan of experimenting with different services because at the end of the day, I care less about people signing up for my formal offerings, and I care more about communication ministries being healthy. So let's experiment. Let's try something new. So I said, sure, let's give it a shot. And so we go through the process. I'll describe it in a little bit here because it's actually, I'm going to be now doing this. This is now something I'm pulling out of my consulting, and I'm going to have it be kind of its separate own standalone thing because I actually think it can be really helpful. When I presented these different strategies to them over the weeks that we were working together, one of the things that came up I really appreciated, but it also really ties to this question of what an effective strategy looks like. They just said, we really appreciate how flexible this strategy is for our current state because there's so much in flux for them, because so much is changing. They needed to develop some guidance that wasn't so rigid. I think our tendency when it comes to strategies is we feel like we need to over-engineer our solution. We need something that is super robust, and we need something that is super thorough. And the reality is that often makes the strategy incompatible with the organization. It becomes too rigid to be able to work in what is a pretty flexible and fluid environment. And so I was encouraged by that because that's my goal, is to build something that is flexible enough for them to take and implement. But it also really affirmed for me that this might be valuable for more churches. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically releasing this as a service that I provide. And so if you need strategy in different areas or in one area of your ministry, but you either don't have time or you don't have the skill set, great. Go to lunchtimeheroes.co/strategy. The process is pretty straightforward. It kicks off with, you'll never guess, a kickoff call. The goal is just to get clarity around where you are today. What is the tension, the problem, and the struggle of your reality today? And then help me understand where you want to go. What does the future look like? Tell me about, describe the ideal state. From there, I go back to the drawing board and I start working up a strategy that is built specifically for your ministry, specifically for your mission, for your values, for your organization, relative to the reality that you're sitting in today and relative to the goal, the destination that you want to get to. Once that's built, the next week, we'll have another conversation. I'm going to present it to you. You're the boss now. All right, here's the strategy. Here's my recommendations. Here are the things that I think are the best next steps for you and the best way for you to be making decisions strategically with regards to the problem you're trying to solve. So then we'll talk about it. What do you think? Does this work? Are there challenges that still exist? Do you think that this will be, high resistance? What needs to change? The next week, I'll go through and make those changes, make some adjustments. And then the last week, we'll have one last meeting. I'll present you, or I'll give you the final strategy. Hey, here's the document. The way I always prepare these, I like preparing them in Keynote. And then you can, or I can export it, whatever, but then you can get it as a document that's ready to present if you want to share this with leadership. Then you have those documents, but then in that last conversation, we're also going to build a plan to implement and roll this out. What does it look like for you to take this idea, these strategies, or this one strategy, depending on what it looks like? What does it look like for you to roll that out? And we'll build that. We'll build that together because you need to get buy-in in order for these things to be successful. And so the right strategy plus the right implementation plan is going to dramatically increase the odds of you being successful in this. So if that sounds like something that would be helpful, again, whether it's, I'm new to this role and I don't really know what to do here. I don't really know how to think strategically about these problems, or I've been doing this for years. I just don't got time for this. Either way, lunchtimeheroes.co/strategy. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. But I'd love to chat with you and talk about what that could look like for your ministry. Now that we have a broader context in which this question is kind of coming to us, what exactly does an effective strategy look like? What are the traits? And so there's five. There's 5 traits that I have seen. that separates an effective strategy from an ineffective strategy. The first one here is an effective strategy sets clear expectations. An effective strategy will eliminate surprises. This is really important because surprises are very stressful for ministry leaders. I have found that people like surprises if it's like, I got you a new car, or there's birthday cake in the kitchen. Like, those are great surprises. Will my ministry event actually be promoted on time? That's not a good surprise. Even if the answer is yes, there's still a lot of stress that comes in the unknown of that. And then if the answer is no, well, then there's a lot of concern that comes with that. What a clear expectation does for a ministry leader is it maps out what's allowed and what isn't. So you know exactly what's going on. You know exactly what's not going on. The example I always love pointing to here is a promotional plan. If you have an effective promotional plan, every ministry that has an event, they will know exactly what the promotion of that event will look like. So if I'm in charge of men's ministry and I say I'm going to have a men's retreat, I know what promotion will look like because the promotional plan has set clear expectations for me. And this is really important because when you set the expectations, even if they aren't loved by everyone, you're setting the expectations and there's less argument and disagreement because of the unknown. There's also less positioning or posturing to say, well, we need more than that. We should get different. Well, I think we should do this. I found this other thing that might be effective. Those are all interesting and often unhelpful recommendations to us, but we don't really know how to navigate them if we don't have clear expectations. What this does is it also gives us a real powerful response to those recommendations. Well, I love that you're recommending Snapchat for men's ministry. So right now, that's not a part of our communication strategy. That's not a part of our promotional plan. But what I can do is I can put that in sort of the idea bucket of maybe we'll consider it, and I'll look at it when we do a reevaluation. Very clear expectations. So what you're actually telling them right now, if a ministry leader comes to you and says that, you're saying, no, we are not going to use Snapchat for the promotion of your event. What is on our document that has been approved, that is what we are using for your event. But I hear what you're saying. I understand that this is a recommendation, and we will consider it. So you're being heard, and your opinion is actually being considered, but not now. That's clear because we have a strategy, and it sets clear expectations. So that's the first. An effective strategy sets clear expectations. Second, an effective strategy is human. Oftentimes our temptation, and I alluded to this earlier, our temptation when creating a new strategy is to define everything. The problem is when we do this, we're actually removing opportunities for humanness to exist. This is a really interesting one in the era of AI. I believe that imperfection is actually going to be an asset moving forward. I've seen this happen now a couple of times over the years. So when I was in college, this was in early 2000s, everything was moving digital. But it wasn't quite there yet, but it started to become there over my time in college. So I was in college from 1999 to 2004. So what happened in the midst of this 5-year span for us was the progress being made in the digital space was remarkable. And what we began benefiting from in this transition was imperfections were now native to the final product, as opposed to we had to do a ton of work to get there. When I would go and take pictures, let's say I'm shooting black and white, that was easier to develop on our own. So I would go shoot a roll of black and white film. Then I would come back to the darkroom and I would process the film. If I processed that film wrong, then I was now limited throughout the duration of the process. It meant that I wasn't going to get prints that were as good as if I had developed them myself well. And instead, I'm going to be developing prints off of less capable negatives. So what I actually would do, because I didn't trust my capabilities to do it, I actually went to a photo shop, and they, not the application, a shop that was specialized in photography. I'm realizing here I have to caveat all these things, but I would go to a place that would develop film for me, I'll say it that way, and they developed it excellent every time. So then I could start going into the darkroom and I could make prints based off of good film. Okay. Now I have to develop the film. And so if I don't expose it correctly, if I don't leave it in the right chemicals for the right amount of time, it's easy for negatives to get scratched if you're not careful handling them. So there are all of these problems that you run into. So where I actually found myself was I would take photos and then I would scan them, and then I would spend probably 2 hours touching them up in Photoshop, now meaning the application. So in this case, Photoshop, the application. And when digital started coming along in a way where the quality was good, where the size of the image was big enough to use meaningfully, I switched right away. And the reason I did is because I didn't want to waste time fixing the imperfections. I just wanted an image that didn't have a bunch of scratches on it, that didn't have a bunch of little hairs on it when I scanned it, that didn't have all of these blemishes. So that was sort of the chase. And that was what digital gave us. Digital gave us an image right out of the camera that was super clean. It saved an unbelievable amount of time. And you know what happened? Photography started to feel sterile. It started to feel humanless. It started to feel clinical almost. And so what do you see a resurgence of? You see a resurgence of people putting filters on images. So now we're going back to, I've taken a perfect photo, but now it lacks soul. How do I reintroduce some character and some charm into the image itself? This is why humanity, the humanness of what we do is so important. We're entering into an era where AI-driven things will continue to remove the human element from what we're doing and what we're interacting with. But what's interesting is that the church is not a series of processes. The church is a people. And so when you're building a strategy, you have to remember that we are humans and our strategy is designed to communicate to humans. So that means don't spend so much time digging so deeply into the details that you don't leave any room for anything to change. Personal expression has to live somewhere in this. Now, I appreciate we want to guard things. We want to put, guardrails up. We want to have clarity. I get it. But sometimes things come up that are outliers, abnormal situations, or unique opportunities. Don't let your strategy lose its humanness by being too much, by being over-engineered and too controlling. So an effective strategy is human. The third thing here that an effective strategy is, effective strategies are flexible. People change, environments change, technology changes, culture changes. So, I'm guessing you know where I'm going here. Your strategies should also change. We need to stop thinking about strategies as the right answer. They are not the right answer. They are our answer to this moment in time. But as the variables change, so should our strategies. So an effective strategy is one that flexes. This is why copying another church's strategy is so problematic. There's nothing morally wrong with it in the sense that most churches are very open with this stuff. Yeah, this is how we do it. Great, do it this way. The problem isn't that. The problem is their strategies are solving their problems. Their strategies are promoting their mission. Your strategies need to be built with your mission and your congregation in mind. When you're building it that way, you can build it in a way that's flexible in the right ways. The problem when you copy from another organization is that rarely is their strategy flexible enough for your culture. Fourth, effective strategies should make on-mission decisions easier. I can't tell you the number of meetings that I've sat in where people start talking about their own personal opinion on things. Well, I think we should do that. Oh, I think we should do that. Well, I think we should do this. And then after about 20 minutes, somebody chimes in and says, look, these are all interesting perspectives, but we are a church who does blank. The answer is right in front of us. Because we are a church that does blank, let's move forward with this on-mission decision. What it does is it helps us be very clear about why we're making each decision that we're making. We don't make decisions because you think that that would be neat to have that. We make decisions based on our mission. And then fifth, an effective strategy accomplishes its goal. Now, this sounds like a silly addition. You're like, oh, you needed 5, huh? No. You would be shocked at how many strategies are passionately defended, but they don't work. Whenever you create a strategy, you have to establish some sort of measurement. What are you trying to accomplish? What is the goal of this strategy? So as an example, in 2023, I invested a lot into social media. I had a very clear goal. I wanted to generate leads from my business. So I said social media is a great way to do it. I don't have to spend money on ads if I don't want to, which I didn't. So I want to go for organic social, pushing really hard on it. My goal was to generate leads. And because of that, I knew volume of content was going to be the best approach for that stretch. At my busiest, I was posting something like 21 short videos a week. And I think it was 2 long form videos every week. A ton of content was going out. And I felt like I was filming all the time. I actually really enjoyed it, but I wasn't doing it because I enjoyed it. I was doing it because I had a clear goal. So here's what happened. My channel grew. My views grew. My subscriber count grew. But you know what didn't grow? My leads. I got 0. After all of the effort that I put in across multiple social channels, no one reached out and said, hey, I found your content on social media. I would love to have a conversation about how you can help our church build a healthy creative ministry. So I changed my strategy. I mean, right? Like that's pretty obvious because an effective strategy has to consider the goal. And if it's not accomplishing the goal, it has to adjust in order to accomplish the goal. So if you're constantly running a strategy and it's not getting the results that you need, then you need to stop. You need to stop doing the thing. This happens all the time in the church where we've done something for such a long time that we just always do it, but we never really evaluate if it's successful or if it's helpful or if it's working, if it's accomplishing the thing that needs to get accomplished. Let's say you have a goal of informing your congregation about upcoming events. And you have this idea that you want to get rid of the bulletin. After all, conventional wisdom here. No one reads the bulletin, right? I used to hear that all the time. Okay, great. Try it. But measure if people are more aware of events. If they're not, then you've either made the wrong decision and need to go bring the bulletin back, or you need to figure out another way to solve the problem. But what I keep seeing is people get rid of their bulletin and they haven't introduced anything new to solve the problem. They just get rid of it. Let's say that this is your scenario. So you can bring the bulletin back, or you can begin thinking through ways to solve the actual problem. Maybe we need an app. Maybe we need a custom part of the website. Maybe we need a monthly publication. Maybe we start up an email newsletter. And maybe we move all of the bulletin content into the newsletter. There's lots of ways you can solve this problem, but you can't just sit satisfied in the decision or the strategy that you've built if it's not working. You need to be evaluating if it's working. Your strategy needs to change in order to accomplish the goal. And the reality is that strategies do need to change regularly. In fact, one of the most common indicators of an unhealthy communications ministry that I see is when the communications people are adamant about defending their strategy, but they have no justification as to whether or not it works. Like they can't explain why that strategy is so important. It would be one thing if it was, look, we've had 0 complaints from anybody in the car. Everybody knows what's going on here. Okay, well, you have a very valid argument. That's not what I hear. I hear because we're the comm team and we're the ones who make the strategy. Nope. That attitude is terrible and you need to stop if that's where you're at. Strategies need to change regularly. I recommend reevaluating things every 90 days. And when I say that, I don't mean like a rebuild from the ground up. I mean, check in and assess how are we doing over this 90-day stretch? Are things moving in the direction that we need them to go? Is there a catastrophic miss? Or are we willing to give this another 90 days to see what's happening? What this does is it lets you catch a problem before it's a catastrophe, before it's a really major problem. But it also gives you these nice indicators in terms of just the general trajectory and how you're moving. It's very helpful to be able to have an answer to these questions. I had somebody on our team, they were adamant that we needed to switch providers for our app. I mean, they would find me at every opportunity and start lecturing me about how our app needs to be leveraged better. And at one point, I just pulled the analytics and I said, if I told you that our app launched 70,000 times this calendar year, would that like get you off my case? And they're like, what? What do you mean? That's incredible. I'm like, okay, because that's what it's been. So like, can we just stop now? Can we be done with the conversation? The reality is that I should have gone to the data much sooner than I did. And so by doing this every 90 days, we have a very clear understanding of how we're doing. And then annually, I actually recommend blocking off maybe a day or two. And now you do kind of a deep dive. All right, so we have 4 quarters of seeing what it's like without a bulletin. All right, what do we think? Ask ministry leaders, ask some of the people that you know in the congregation. Look at event attendance. Was event attendance up, down, or the same? Can you track any of these behaviors back to the fact that there is no bulletin? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to assess, was this a good decision? Not because you like it better, but was this a good decision because this helps accomplish the mission, because this helps accomplish our goal? That's really what you're looking to do. And so by doing this every 90 days, a quick kind of check-in, identifying different key measurements, logging those things and saying, yep, okay, this is where I feel like we are right now, or this is where the data says we are right now. Seems like this is okay. This isn't the best, but we'll let it run again, or this is awful. We need to make an adjustment. And then every year do a bigger, deeper dive in terms of, are our strategies doing what we need them to do? What needs to adjust? Ultimately, your strategies are such a critical piece of protecting your health and well-being while serving in creative ministry or communications ministry, even more specifically. And so the reason that this conversation matters so much to me is because you matter so much to me. Your health and well-being matters so much to me because you're doing really important work in connecting the mission of the church with the body of believers in your congregation. I want your time in ministry to be rich and fulfilling and healthy. And strategies I have found are one of the very, very key ways for you to make that happen. And that is how I would answer the question, what does an effective strategy look like?
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Healthy Creative Ministry Podcast. This podcast is just one of the ways Lunchtime Heroes can help you build a healthy creative ministry in your church. Stay up to date on the latest by signing up for the Creative Bites email at lunchtimeheroes.co.